All right, just in the way of introductions, I'm Billy Teals. I'm with the Master Naturalist, and this is another lecture of the African Nature Center lecture series. And our theme throughout this has been, what can you do for the environment? Or how can I make a difference in conservation? So the reason we're talking about wood ducks today is not because of wood ducks. It's because of nesting boxes. One of the things that you can do here to make a difference is erect a nesting box. And the kind of nesting box that you erect depends on the kind of habitat that you have, rather than the other way around. You can't pick a bird, for example, and then erect a nesting box and hope that it comes. And unless you're just lucky. It's best to know what kind of habitat you have. And if you have that kind of habitat, then possibly you can attract birds by putting up a box. So today I want to talk about wood ducks, which is kind of where nesting boxes all began. And we'll get into that when we get into the lecture. So wood ducks are different. They're not like any other ducks we have here in the United States. So you have four different tribes. You have puddle ducks, which are like mallards and gadwalls and widgeons. You have diving ducks, which are like redheads and scaup and ringneck ducks. And you have tree ducks, like whistling ducks, like Fulton's whistling duck and black-bellied whistling duck. The only member of its tribe here in the United States, which are the perching ducks, is the wood duck. Its nearest relative is the mandarin duck, which occurs in Asia. So they're unique. They're not only unique in they are able to perch, thus the name, but their toes are flexible. They have long nails that allows them to perch on trees. They're also cavity nesters. So they're unique in a number of aspects. They also have the most ornate, I would call it, plumage. All other ducks they're a handsome lot. I wouldn't say that they're not ornate, but this is the most ornate. The male wood duck is probably the most ornate duck that we have in America. So unusual and unique in that respect. Another thing that makes them unusual is their call. So y'all have queued up already your call. So go ahead and play those. So that's not a quack. Not a whistle. What does it sound like? It does. It says that's the other common name, the colloquial name for wood ducks are squealers. So if you get to Mississippi, they don't call them wood ducks down there, they call them squealers. Those are the people that are back in the swamp. So they are a beautiful bird. When I was in undergraduate school, I found out there was such a thing as a waterfowl biologist. That's what I decided that I wanted to be. So I was in Western Oklahoma, and my advisors told me that if I was serious about being a waterfowl biologist, that I should apply to graduate schools in universities that have some kind of wildlife program. So when I was last semester senior, I wrote probably 30 different universities in the United States looking for a graduate research assistantship. And I heard back from two of them. One was from the University of Nebraska. I would have been working on waterfowl behavior if I'd have decided to go on there. And the other was at Mississippi State University, and it was working with wood ducks. So guess which one I decided to go to? And it is mostly, I think, now that I look back at it, it wasn't the deal that I got financially, it was the bird itself. You know, the male bird, the male wood duck is a sexy bird. So I kind of got drawn in to just the species and how beautiful it was. So it's that's sort of the downfall of the wood duck as well, because at the turn of the last century, it was almost extinct. So people hunted almost to oblivion the wood duck. And part of it is because they just wanted to shoot a bird that was so beautiful. But another part was that the feathers were used for tying a fly, a fishing fly called the royal coachman. A lot of the scientists in the last century said it was, going to be extinct in a few years, but it held on until the 20th century. So I'll show you what a royal coachman looks like. See that little part of the fly? It's made from the flank feathers. These feathers right here. Anytime you make something commercially valuable, people will hunt it till there is no more. They'll take the very last one, unless there's some kind of regulation that is enforced. That happened with egret blooms, that happened with ginseng, it happened with anything that's valuable. So unless there are seasons established, you might as well say goodbye to things in this day and age.
Let me just take it down. Okay, there you
I did.
go. I don't know. It's the same. You don't mess him up. It's the same person that comes in, he's coming in and out.
So wood duck populations kind of walked along till about 1918, when we established a migratory bird treaty with Mexico and Canada that set limits on waterfowl populations. First, it established hunting seasons. That at that time was in the hands of the states. The states were doing different things, so the migratory bird treaty was an agreement between Canada and the United States to do three things. The first thing was that it made it illegal to take or to hunt migratory birds of any species. I mean, we can't hunt migratory birds today. They're protected under the migratory bird treaty. And the second thing it did is for those species that were traditionally hunted, for which there were waterfowl seasons or bird seasons, it established an agreement that the three countries would assess the status of the populations and set hunting seasons, not statewide, but among the three different countries that entered the agreement. And that's the way it's been ever since that day. We do have hunting season, and those birds that are either rare or are in short supply, they are illegal to take. Those that are, in good supply, depending on the year, you can take several of them. So hunting seasons are established by flyway councils, and it's a federal thing, always has been since the migratory bird treaty. And the other thing it did was it allowed the federal government to acquire land for those lands that were critical for the survival of migratory fowl. So lands like the Aransas Refuge in South Texas that are home to the whooping cranes were acquired later, not 1918, but later under this authority. So it's landmark legislation, and that had a tremendous effect on the wood duck. So by the 1920s, population had increased quite a bit. By the 1930s, they decided that they would try a new technique, nesting boxes. And by the time that we had the refuges, nesting boxes, and protective legislation. The wood duck numbers have grown in this last century to about 4 million birds. And today, the Fish and Wildlife Service estimates that there are 3 million breeding pairs of wood ducks in North America. So that's gone to something that's almost extinct in the last century to 6 million birds today. And much of that has been due to the erection of nesting boxes. So the first nesting boxes on record were done. And this was done by Fish and Wildlife Service and the Chautauqua Refuge in Illinois back in the mid-30s. And by the end of the 30s, this guy right here, Frank Belrose, had spread them all over Illinois. He worked for Illinois Natural History Survey. And he's the reason I'm mentioning him. He's sort of the Johnny Appleseed of wood duck boxes. He was a component not only in Illinois, but throughout the United States. He's Mr. Wood Duck. He wrote this book, Ecology and Management of the Wood Duck, in 1994. He died in 2005, but he's long since been regarded as the authority in the United States on wood duck. So if you want to read much more detail than I'm giving right here, that would be a good read. So with a lot of species, you have these maps that show incrementally how populations have increased over time. And I couldn't find that before, but this will give you some idea. So not only has wood duck numbers increased, but their range has expanded. So this is what Pulich, who wrote Birds of North Central Texas, said in 1988 about the wood duck here. Uncommon to rare transient, uncommon to fairly common winter resident, uncommon to rare nesting species. And here is the 2020 breeding bird survey maps. It's put together by the Fish and Wildlife Service. And this is based on the breeding survey, which is done across the United States. It's been done for the last 50 years. These are the densities. So imagine 6 million birds, right? That's what the Fish and Wildlife Service says we have. This is the relative abundance by the different shades of red of that 6 million species during the breeding bird survey. And this is the Christmas bird count. So the middle of the winter. So wood ducks are migratory. Some of them are resident, but some of them are migratory. So they don't just stay in one place. Even those that breed here will have a shift, a shuffle after they breed. So you can see where most of them occur during the middle of winter is down here in the lower Mississippi Valley. And throughout the South in general. And that's where their stronghold was to begin with. They're birds of wooded swamps. They nest in and around oxbow lakes and sloughs originally. They are pretty adaptable. They will nest around farm ponds and rivers and creeks. They also eat food from trees in those regions. Bottomland hardwoods, the acorns are practically everywhere food and habit studies have been done in the winter. Acorns are always at the top. And they're not eating big bur oak acorn type acorns. They're eating small acorns. They call them pin oaks in the South, but they're really water oaks and willow oaks that have a small seed and grow in flats that are flooded during the wintertime. That's where they traditionally. This is to give you an idea of what's happening kind of right here and now in the last 10 or so years. This is from eBird. If you go to eBird, they have a site on there that tracks status and trends. And they have information. This is based on eBird sightings. And those of you who aren't familiar with eBird, people, birders, go out and count birds like we do in the first Saturday bird counts up here at the Acton Nature Center. And then they post their numbers to eBird. There are a lot of birders in the United States. More so than just organized that are going up here at the Acton Nature Center. There are people that, live for birding. So they send their information into eBird, and eBird has a way of tallying this information and tracking status and trends of population across the United States. So you can see down here the traditional range of the wood duck. We're talking about the breeding season here from 2012 to 2022. They're not doing so well. The trends, the relative abundance is down, which is kind of the way that the trends are with other birds in the United States over the past 50 years. But look what's happening in the north, and look what's happening here in the fringe of the wood duck's range. There's an increase. Take a look at what's happening in the prairies here. Were wood ducks here to begin with? Were there trees to nest in? Very, very few. So, you get arguments about an animal that was here to begin with, nearly became extinct, and now is spreading back. Is it spreading back into where it once occurred? Or are they spreading back to areas where they never occurred before? So we don't really know the answer to that, but certainly they're more abundant here than they've ever been in recorded history. And why would that be? Huh?
Boxes.
Boxing is right. We didn't have cavities. They nest in natural cavities. We don't have extensive bottomland hardwoods. So we've shown that the erection of wood duck nesting boxes has had a positive trend in wood duck population. Not only are we increasing numbers, but we're expanding the range. So lots of people across the United States are erecting wood duck boxes and have been ever since the 30s, and Frank Bell Road started his Johnny Appleseed Crusade. So we've done that right here at the Acton Nature Center. So this is the 2013 homeschool class at the Acton Nature Center. Part. It's not all of them, but part. Where did they go at? At any rate, maybe they were making bluebird calls. So we've had an exercise at the homeschool program at the Acton Nature Center, at least since 2013, where we've made nesting boxes. And this year, we made 3 wood duck nesting boxes. And most of this is done under the direction and supervision of Joe Langman. So he had the group that day. And if you don't recognize some of this is back when Jake was a pup. So 2013, he was what, 13 years old? So we're going to talk about the fate of these 3 nesting boxes before this is over. But it's a fairly common trend throughout Texas where there's been a big push to erect nesting boxes at the state level. That has happened in every state in the union, and is probably more responsible for the range expansion than anything. So here's the theory. Regardless of geographic location, nest boxes that exist among quality root habitats are constructed adequately and are properly maintained can increase local wood duck populations. Wood ducks need a cavity in which to nest and an adjacent, within 1 to 3 miles, wetland habitat that contains some trees, shrubs, and dense herbaceous vegetation that provides quantities of aquatic vertebrates for ducklings. Generally, where such substantial food base occurs, And natural tree cavities are sparse, there may be a significant increase due to nesting boxes. So, as I mentioned, whether you put up a nesting box or not should depend on if you have any habitat that is sufficient to support. If you don't, you're just building a trap for wood ducks. And they will nest almost anywhere, in almost any box. I've seen them in tin boxes, I've seen them in boxes in the middle of town. They want to nest in nesting boxes.
Like a squirrel.
They are competitive. But we'll take a look at some of the competitors of wood ducks before this gets over. So we talked about wood ducks being different. And as we talked about here at the very beginning of this presentation, you seldom ever see them in large numbers. They generally don't mix with other waterfowl. So I mentioned dappling ducks and diving ducks. See them sometime in big numbers together, but you seldom ever see a flock of wood ducks. That would be a fairly large flock right there. And that would be during the daytime. So this is the middle of winter, let's say January. We have ducks that have migrated down from the north, and you have local ducks, which bred here. They mix. And some of those males may be from Illinois, and some of the females may be too, but there may be one or two females that are from here. The females will stay here. The females will pick a male that may be from Illinois, or she may pick one that's from Mississippi, or she may pick one that's from here. So whenever the ducks are from here, pick a male, they'll nest here. If it's a female from Illinois, she'll go back to there and she'll take her male with her. So we have a mixing of the wood duck population. And she'll pick a new mate every year. That's why all wood ducks look alike. Is because she's gonna have a different mate from one season to the next. One season it may be a duck from Minnesota, the next one from Illinois, the next maybe one from Texas. And that mixing of the population means that there are always very few variables in the population in terms of how they look and how they act. There are no subspecies of wood ducks, as opposed to something like a Canada goose population. Canada geese mate for life. They breed within a certain vicinity. And you'll have some Canada geese that are as large as 15, 16 pounds, and some that are as small as a mountain. Some that are very dark, some that are very light. We have 6 different subspecies of Canada geese and one species, the cackling goose, that are all a little bit different because of this localized lifelong breeding, not with ducks. There's a continuous mixing of the population. So let's say that was the middle of winter, that last slide was. So in January, the males and females will pair up. And again, she could be with a male from Illinois, let's say. They'll pair up and they'll start getting away from the rest of the group, and they'll start a change in behavior. The females are going to have to start nesting here within a few months. So she changes her diet. Nesting requires a lot of invertebrates, as far as protein. So she'll shift from a diet, I mentioned they were eating mast of trees like acorns and stuff. She'll change her diet where she was eating almost 100% that to eating almost 80% protein, almost 80% insects and invertebrates in anticipation for the nesting season. And they'll start looking for nests. And they do this pretty early. Most cavity nesters do nest early. And the reason they can do this is because they don't have to worry about hiding their nest in trees. And when we go for a walk to search for golden cheek warblers in Dinosaur Valley State Park, what do? Try to get down there before the 1st of April, while the leaves are still off the tree, so we can see the birds. Once the leaves get on the tree, nests are a whole lot harder to find. So birds, songbirds that use trees for nesting generally nest a whole lot later than birds that nest in cavities. They don't need to hide their eggs. They already have a built-in hidden mechanism. So at this time of year, they've already selected their nest location. And it's generally the female that does it. And as beautiful as the male is, he's nowhere to be found at about the middle of March till, the next time that she nests next year, and then it will be a different male. So he's pretty temperate. He served his function on it. She'll select her nest, and of course, where they traditionally nested were natural cavities. Of course, one of the reasons that we've been able to expand the population is we replace those natural cavities, which are sometimes in short supply, by nesting boxes. So here's what I did in my dissertation. Given the choice between natural cavities and artificial nesting boxes, which do you think a female wood duck would prefer?
Sounds like a trick question.
No, it's not. It's not a fair question.
I go with natural. Natural or?
The natural cavities are warmer than boxes.
This is a 145-acre oxbow lake. This is the Tombigbee River. This lake is filled with large cypress that rim the edge of the lake. This is open water. This is the whole lake. Looks like a key. Can everybody see the outline of that lake? 145 acres. About twice the size of the Acton Nature Center. Acton Nature Center is 75 acres. This dark is open water. The light around the open water, the cypress trees, and this light here in the middle of the lake is water tupelo. They're trees that grow in the water, can get quite large. And this was a very old stand of water tupelo. That's what the edge of the lake looked like, with cypress going around it. That's what the interior of the lake looked like with water tupelo. That's a water tupelo. Big buttress bark. They're fairly soft and they're easy to rot. So this lake had numerous trees with natural cavities. And also, it was controlled by a sportsman's club. So they erected 30 wood duck nesting boxes. So my project was to compare the natural cavities in this lake with the nesting boxes that were in them. I had to climb like 90 trees to define what the base for the natural cavities were, and out of those 90, there were only about 35, or there were 35 that were sound. A lot of them would be hollow all the way down. A lot of them have a nesting platform that would be too low for the wood duck to use. So wood duck nesting platforms typically are no deeper than 3 feet. From the hole down to the bottom of the tree where the wood duck would nest. So if it was below 3 feet, we'd throw those out. And a lot of trees would have, just like we had experience with at the nature center, they would have honeybees in them. And I didn't notice at the time, but water tupelo are one of the favorite trees for honeybees. You heard the song Tupelo Honey? Yeah, well, that's why. It's, we're talking about water tupelo whenever Van Morrison is singing about she's an angel of the first degree. At any rate, it is sort of a perfect setup here. To compare, in a 140-acre lake, you have these large trees with 35 holes that I had to climb 90 trees to determine there were only 30, not 90. And then these wood duck boxes. So that tells you something right there. That if a wood duck is trying to find a natural cavity in that, and he has that, which do you think that they're going to choose? It's not because they're more visible. That's been the theory for years, but that's not the rest of the story. So here's the results, and I'm not going to try to bore you with detail, but there were 30 natural cavities, 25 nesting boxes. The percent use of the nest boxes was 73.2%. Percent use of the natural cavities was 26.5. So for some reason, they seem to prefer the nest boxes over the natural cavities. But look here, and this is the first time this has been done, by the way. There was nobody at that time that were comparing natural cavities versus nesting boxes. This was, a million years ago and 1,000 miles away, back in the early 70s. So the percent success in the natural cavities was a whole lot higher than there was in the nest boxes. Sort of surprised there too, and so the question over the years has been, and there have been subsequent studies that have shown similar results, is why are the nest boxes so preferred? And in open areas and over water, they are much more visible, and they are much more used. But if you get away from the nest boxes, then the percent success is much higher. And what defines percent success? It's the same as we do with our bluebird boxes. So if you have a clutch of eggs that is laid, then you can have 3 things that can happen. One is that you can have all of the eggs hatch, or you can have most of the eggs hatch, or you can have loss of all the eggs due to predation, or loss of all the eggs due to abandonment. Those are kind of 4 choices. So percent success, like in our bluebird boxes at the center, is that if some or all of the eggs hatch, that's successful. Generally, what happens is that if you have a nest of wood duck eggs, and they have a lot of eggs, they average like 13 eggs. If you almost, every 3rd nest will have like 12 eggs hatch, and there'll be 1 that won't hatch. That would still be a successful nest box as far as the measurement. So here are the actual numbers. And you see, this is only 2 years, and this is a criticism of most graduate student studies. We've run the bluebird boxes up here. This makes the 18th year. So with that, you can run statistics on it, and you can show statistical trends. With just 2 years, you wonder if that data will hold true year in, year out, year in, year out, or this was just a fluke in those years. So here's what else. nested in boxes, and these are the actual numbers. So look at honeybees and the natural cavities. And again, I didn't know this at the time. I didn't even know that honeybees made honey out of tupelo flowers. But there were a lot of honeybee use, even in the, I would have counted it out had there been bees in the tree all the way up to the hose. No, we wouldn't even consider that in part of the comparison. But these are trees that had a nesting platform that were, the bees weren't in the trees to begin with, but they had a nesting platform within 3 feet. And you still had a really high percent of bee use. And again, this is tupelo, and we now know that, you know, tupelo trees are really used for honeybees. I gotta, let's go back to the slide. So, you know, imagine you're on a tree. These trees were approached with a flat bottom john boot. I'm wearing tree spurs, so the trick was the guy that's running the motor would ease me up to the tree. I would jump out of the boat, grab a hold of the tree, and then dig my spurs in, and then climb up the tree. And at the time, I seldom used a safety harness until I got to the cavity and where I would take measurements. So imagine though that you're here at the cavity, and it is a bee tree. There's no way to get out, so you just kind of got to grin and take it. And climbing up a tree that has bees in it makes them mad. So when you get to the hole, they're after you. I developed a little allergy to bees, and it would just ruin the day. Not so much because it hurt or stung so bad, but I would get sick at my stomach and my legs would get stiff, so I couldn't climb anymore. And I was having to, you know, it takes a little expertise to run the motor of the boat and ease up to the tree and get this finagling done to let you climb the tree. So I only had 1 or 2 people I could rely on to run the motor of the boat, and I wasn't paying them anything. So at any rate, the honeybees were a problem to me.
Did you have a hat, a bee hat, or?
I had a hard hat, but it didn't have anything else. There's enough going on there that you didn't do, you know, just climbing a tree and doing like 15 or 20 of them a day is hard enough without any paraphernalia on. So anyway, here's what else nest. And it's an important point, I think, with nest boxes. We have nest boxes up at the Nature Center. We have 37. And almost every year, every year, we have many more Buicks Wren use those nest boxes than we did blue ones. And we have Carolina chickadees, we have ivory titmice, and we have white-footed deer mice. And you know, I'm always happy to see those other species. I don't ever look at them as nest competitors. And the same with wood duck boxes. If you build a box and something else comes, that's just added gravy as far as I'm concerned. You hope that a wood duck uses it, but you shouldn't be disappointed if something else uses it. So those are the other things that use the cavities and wood duck boxes in this study. Notice here that a raccoon actually used 2 different families that used the wood duck boxes 1 year. And these are boxes and cavities that are out in water. I'm talking about 3, 4, 5 feet of water. And all the reasons why we didn't have a successful nest when we started was due to predation. We didn't have any abandonment. It was all due to predation and all due to rat snares. Even though raccoons nested in one of the wood duck boxes, we never had a predation interaction, which is unusual. So here's some nesting biology. Clutch size of wood duck is 6 to 16 eggs. I've never seen one that had 6. I've never seen one that had less than 12. Most of them are 13, 14, or 15, unless it's dump nested in. So what happens in areas with high wood duck concentrations is that a female will be fertile and ready to lay an egg, and she may not be mated up and have a nesting place, so she'll dump in another duck's nest. And if the density is really high, there can be nest boxes sometimes that will have 25, 30 eggs in them. Of course, none of those winds up, none of those hatch. So dump nesting is not something that managers look forward to or deal with. Most instances, particularly on the edges of the range where the densities aren't high, that'll never happen. So they can be tube rooted. One year in the study there that I did, water got up over the wood duck boxes. It's in the floodplain of the Tombigbee River. And the water got up over the boxes while a few of them still had eggs. A few of them had eggs in them, and of course destroyed the eggs. But they all re-nested that year anyway. And they will produce another brood. It's not uncommon to have wood ducks produce 2 broods. And in some instances, it's even been documented that they have to produce 3 broods. So the egg width and egg length, all cavity nesters lay pretty round eggs. Why would that be? Not oval eggs, like a chicken, or oval eggs, like a mockingbird or a songbird.
It's not gonna roll out, right?
Exactly. Yeah. They don't have to worry about the eggs rolling out of the nest. So that's the theory about why birds lay oval eggs. Keep them from rolling out of the nest. So the incubation period is 28 to 37 days. I like to think of it as around a month. So the nesting period was 56 to 70 days. I like to think of this as 2 months. So, takes 1 month to lay the eggs. They'll lay an egg like every other day. Like our little birds up here at the nature center will lay an egg a day. The wood ducks, it takes 30 days to complete all the eggs that she's gonna lay. And then another 30 days to incubate them before they leave the nest. So a lot longer, because, but here's where they got it, is that as soon as the eggs hatch, they're precocial. And they can leave the nest. So they're ready to go just as soon as they're hatched. And she'll, depending on how she turns and manages and sits on the egg, she can make it to where even though it's taken an entire month to lay a clutch of eggs, he manages those eggs so that they all hatch within a day. After they've hatched, in about a day, she starts calling them out of the cavity. She'll first go nearby them and start kind of a modified squeal. We heard the squeal earlier. So the little ducks will respond to that, and then she'll get down on the ground and she'll call them, and then they bail out. And they can be as high as 70 feet up in the tree. And they'll hit the ground and just kind of bounce. And this doesn't hurt them at all. In fact, some people actually think it's better for them to do that, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but they all get out of the tree, hit the ground, and then as soon as they're all there, she gathers them up and then marches them across land to some wetland that has lots of food. So sometimes this may be a mild one. And conventional wisdom always has been, build your nest boxes close to water. Build your nest boxes in the water, even if you can. That will reduce the predation as they go across land. But here's what we found out. I didn't know this before I started the search into this presentation. Is that here is 1996, 1999 study at Mississippi State. 400 ducklings in nest boxes were equipped with radio transmitters. Survival was determined to be low overall, about 20%. They're talking about survival of the ducklings after they have left the box. However, when ducklings travel more than a mile to densely vegetated scrub habitat that did not contain nest boxes, their survival was as great as 60%. So it was actually greater in those nest boxes that were far away from water and maybe 50 feet up in the tree than it was for nest boxes that have been installed in or around water. And the reason is that as attractive as that may be to nesting wood ducks, which I showed in my study, it may also be beneficial to predators of ducks. Thus, it is recommended that nest boxes be scattered amidst habitats with good protective cover and not placed in open environments. If shorelines or open water are the only available sites, it is best to place nest boxes in lower densities such as one box for 2 acres. Back to my lab. Remember, the success was higher in the cavities than it was in the nest boxes? Well, later studies have sort of shown why. There's less predation. There's less, probably not only in the nest box and the nesting cavity itself, but in the survival of the ducklings that leave the cavity. So what do they do when they get to the water? He takes them away from the nest box and leads them to the water, and immediately they're able to feed. So what do they feed in and what do they feed on? For the first 6 weeks, they eat nothing but insects or invertebrates. My master's thesis is on this. What we try to do is show which species of the plant have the greatest quantity of invertebrates. And almost invariably, we show the aquatic plants that have finely dissected leaves contain the most invertebrates. However, those species of plants occur below the water. In more recent studies, we've found that they don't feed below the water, they feed above the water. What they're doing, their food habits, is protecting little bugs. I'm talking true bugs of the order Hemiptera off these leaves. So bugs of the order Hemiptera and different kinds of midges and flies of the order Diptera are what they're eating. They're not going underneath the water hardly at all. They're not eating dragonfly nymphs and predaceous diving beetles and water boatmen and that sort of insect. They're eating these little humpback water striders and little midges that are on the leaves of these plants. So what plants are the most important? Well, obviously those that are above the surface of the water, but the time of the year, so the periodicity of the plant. So these guys get going soon. Remember, this female is wanting to eat insects even before the nest is. So it's kind of like with cattle. You like to have plants that are available in the cool season, like it's why we plant. It's why we oversee our Bermuda grass pastures or coastal pastures with oats or rye, so that they'll have something that they can eat during the winter time. Well, these cool season plants are important to female wood ducks. They're also important to the young, because these young are coming off end of April, 1st of May. So the female starts nesting right around the 1st of March or late February. March would be 30 days, another 30 days would be right around the 1st of May. So this is kind of the perfect plant. That's water pennywort. It occurs early and it is at the surface. Later, as the ducks grow, for about the first 6 weeks, they're eating nothing but insects, but after that, they start taking in more and more vegetable matter, and at the end of a couple of months, they're taking in mostly vegetable matter. So 50 years ago, that would have been a good woodduck box for what we move out of. It's in the open. It's properly constructed, has a nice predator guard. I would say, as far as placement, knowing what we know about today, is that you should put wood duck boxes in an area that is away from the water. And make them so that you can maintain them. We'll see it in another slide later on, but maintain them, I mean to check them, to clean them out and to check them. So don't put them up so high that you can't get to them without a reasonably small ladder. Just don't mind taking back into the swamp. And also making sure that they have predator guards. So this is sort of you can go online and get wood duck box specifications. Most of them are around 2 feet tall and about a foot square. You use, you buy a 12-foot board or a 12-inch board, 12-inch wide and whatever length, that's what you work with. So whatever dimensions that you can make that work. So it's about 2 foot in the back, and it doesn't have to be perfect. Also, this is cut 3.7 by 3 inches. The diameter, it's hard to cut a diameter like that. It's a lot easier just to cut a circle. The reason this is cut like that is because it's small enough that most raccoons can't get into it. And then our predator down here is a snake, so we generally don't have to worry much about raccoons. So I don't worry so much about the design of the box. As I say, they'll nest in metal boxes, they'll nest in boxes made of different kinds of woods. Probably in order of preference would be cypress, rough cut cypress would be the best. The next one would be western cedar. Then the third would probably be having a blank right here, thinking of the name of the wood. Anyway, redwood, stuff that doesn't split. So what winds up with all boxes is sooner or later it'll split. And pine splits easier than those woods, and hardwoods split easier than that. So those would be the biggest. Eastern red cedar would be good if you can get a board of eastern red cedar that would be big enough. So another thing that you want to do is put in nesting materials such as wood shavings in the bottom of the box, up to about 3 inches. And in some boxes, if you had a metal box, you would certainly want to put in something so that the young birds could climb up. But this is not as much problem as people think. Little wood ducks have sharp claws, and they even can use their wings. So they can climb up a box or a tree as deep as 15 feet deep without a problem. But if it's slick, like a metal box, they won't have that. In this area, that's the #1 predator.
So, we don't want the, moving boxes out here.
No,
That's
but that is a bluebird box. There, so you have across the United States, you have black rat snakes. In the south, we have gray rat snakes. Here we have Texas rat snakes. Rat snakes are the #1 predator. In the south. In the north, it's raccoons. And that's why that hole was important. And that's why predator guards are important. Predator guards will protect both snakes and raccoons. And you can make them yourself if you want to mess with the metal, or you can buy them off the internet. We just bought one the other day for a nesting box out here at the center from this company. All right, let's get back to these 3 boxes. So these 3 boxes have specific things. One of them got put on a tree at the Acton Nature Center. We used to have 2 ponds on the adjacent property. A fairly large pond, which was below a fairly small pond. And our riparian woodland backed up to the large pond, and we had another tree that was, or another space, kind of open space that was close to the smaller pond. So we took 2 of these nest boxes and placed them, one on a tree and one on a boulder at the nature center. And both of them were near the northern border of the nature center, to where the young could have gone out of the box and the mother could have taken them a little ways across the pond. So the one that we put on a big live oak tree, which is about 12, 15 foot high. Bill Lionel, who was master naturalist back at the time, and I put this box on the tree. And see that board that's on the back of it there? Without that board, the box would have leaned back because the tree wasn't straight up and down. He was bothered by that. So within a week, we came back to repair that problem, put the board back, and in that week, a screech owl had already occupied the box, and whenever she flied out, she was ready to lay an egg, and it dropped out. So it took less than a week for a screech owl to occupy this box after we put it up. And a screech owl has been in that box off and on over the years. This particular box here eventually got taken over by honeybees, and we gave the whole box away, and then Mark made an owl box, and we put an owl box back up there, and it's in its place. But the place, owls were, and that's what, we probably have one up there this year. There was one there last year. And the other box was kind of down by the smaller pond. And here's what we're finding out about maintenance of boxes. Oftentimes, managers of wood duck boxes visit and inspect structures only once after the birds have been completed. Early in the season, wood ducks may frequently abandon their nests for various reasons or lose their eggs to predators. A Mississippi State University study from 1994 to 2001 demonstrated that 38 to 65% of total wood duck ducklings produced occurred in 2nd or 3rd nesting attempts. This data suggests that nest box maintenance during the breeding season could tremendously boost duckling reduction. So that's another reason why you want to put your boxes where you can get out. We don't have a lot of boxes, and haven't had a lot of nesting up there from wood ducks, but we have had some. That's Madison, the Blattery, of Madison Robinson now, and at the time was helping with wood duck and the bluebird, bluebird box study. This is back in 2019. We, surprise to all of us, not in the one that was in the tree where the owl was using, but the one that was back closer to the smaller pond, we had a wood duck all of a sudden appear. Beautiful nest, 15 eggs in that, and they were successfully hatched. Since that time, the two little ponds and the adjacent property have been obliterated, and a larger pond has been put in its place, but that larger pond hasn't developed the aquatic vegetation that will be necessary for the young. So I don't know that we have very good wood duck habitat up there. There's a good publication, State of Texas Department of Parks and Wildlife. Have got lots of good publications on management of different kinds of birds, and this one is better than most. So this is by Carl Ventress, produced back in 2005. It won't have a lot of the recent information that I gave you, but it's a good publication of the birds. That's kind of it on wood ducks. It's 3:07. I'm taking up an hour.